Hey, it's James Governor. We're here for another Monkcast. Today, I am joined by Helen Altshuler, CEO and co-founder of EngFlow, and we're going to be talking about the challenges of build at scale, build management at AI scale. So I think from my perspective, and I'll jump in a little bit. Well, first I should welcome you, Helen.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Great. So what we're seeing in this industry at the moment is pretty clearly with the onslaught of software being driven by agents, being driven by frontier models and assistive coding, we're just seeing more and more software being built. And there are bottlenecks being created in terms of our processes for getting that software into production. This is a very real problem. I'd say the industry is sort of creaking at the seams. We've certainly seen problems, for example, outages at vendors like GitHub. And so all in all, this is a real industry problem. We're creating so much software at such pace the bottleneck is, as I say, getting that into production. Now, I think what's interesting is that historically, perhaps, we haven't all had these sorts of scale challenges. We haven't had engineering organizations that are large enough. We haven't had sophisticated enough operations that we can be thinking about even rolling out the applications that we're building at this kind of speed. But it seems like now with AI, the world has changed, and I think that's kind of the topic of the conversation today. So, Helen, I think one of the key questions for me is you came out of an environment of high scale. And I'm going to ask you a bit about your history, how you got here. But do we all face the kinds of challenges that a web scale organization faces? Is that really where we are with AI? So let's hear a bit about your journey, why you're the right person to ask about build management at scale.
Sounds great. Yes, our industry is going through a seismic shift. It's quite clear. The code growth significantly accelerated with AI tooling, and as you mentioned, causing outages, really pushing the limits of every developer infrastructure on its way. And so it's interesting to see this because it is familiar environment, and it is something that I've witnessed the successful results of while at Google, and that's for that reason we're seeing the same kind of challenges now faced by the industry, challenges that Google itself faced in 2006, 2008, and so I would like to kind of bring us back into what happened with code growth at Google, and what did Google do, and now the rest of the industry. Why are we all looking at Google's build system called Bazel? And so,
Mhm.
in fact, what we're seeing now is that Bazel is having a moment 10 years after its open sourcing. And so, what happened? What happened to the rest of the
Well, I
industry?
mean, there's a couple of things here. One is almost all great overnight success stories took 10 years. That is a common pattern. So we've got the overnight success, Basil having a moment. But yeah, also we love lessons from history at Red Monk. We do think that, to truly understand what's going on in technology, it always makes sense to understand the foundations, how we got here. So yeah, I'm super interested to hear about the problems Google was facing and Basil. And so yeah, over to you again.
Sure. So Google was facing the building at scale challenges in those years in 2006, 2008. Now Google is doing something unique, which the rest of the industry caught onto as well, which is monorepo style development, which
Uh-huh.
means all of the code base is in one place, and everything is built from source, and everything, all of the tests and builds across different projects are in one repository. And so that allows Google to do a ton of efficiencies and automation, but it also means that Google's builds are huge, and Google's tests are taking a long time. And so over that period of time, Google noticed that the Python scripts that they used to really to compile the language and wrap around the 2 million lines of code makefile caused significant problems. And that's when in 2008, Google decided to staff this project called Revolution Fix It, which one of our current employees at EngFlow, Mike Bland, was the lead for while he was leading the testing grouplet at Google. And that Revolution Fix, it was aimed to bring together the uh, powerful tools that were in place and powerful tools that were being developed into one cohesive system that is changing how builds are working and changing how developer workflows are. And in that time frame, Google staffed the team and did a lot of prep leading to it. Some of these projects were in their nascent form, and essentially it led the effort to revolutionize its developer infrastructure, and with a goal to get to 5-minute builds for any project. And that meant that builds could no longer be done sequentially. There had to be a system that does it in parallel. And so it led to the creation of Google's internal build system called Blaze, which was the starting point for Bazel that we'll talk about later today. And also building parallel engine called Forge, which is the parallel execution of builds at scale, as well as the file system that really was meant to address the source scalability. And so what's really interesting to me here is that around the same time frame, Google noticed that it needs to do massive change in the developer build infrastructure. So like that's where it kind of like thought about build management at scale without actually calling it build management at scale. At the same time, there were also efforts to do source at scale. And so it's also quite interesting for me to see that today we've seen lots of companies starting to re-envision GitHub, the new GitHub, the source management at scale, because they pushed to the limit. And back in 2008, this is also when Google migrated from one code management system into its own created one. So scale is the driver. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it really was about Google building better internally as
Mhm.
it was growing as a company. And today we see in parallels that teams started adapting AI, and now everyone is reaching Google level scale faster than ever before.
Yeah, some of the growth curves are, honestly, frankly, absurd. In this industry, I guess we keep seeing again and again, the fastest growing ever thing. Um, but that doesn't seem to stop. Whether we get the fastest growing company ever to, a billion ARR, or just the sort of the scaling characteristics. Sort of ChatGPT is an amazing example. Fastest growing consumer product ever. um, we're seeing sort of new markets. So this sandbox market at the moment, I think, is a funny one where there are like multiple vendors all doing almost geometric sort of growth, because of just frankly the growth is as they say, off the charts.
Yeah, and this just a few weeks ago, or maybe even just last week, Anthropic published what's happening internally with respect to code contributed by person by quarter, and we see in Q1 of 2026, it jumped from previous quarters, which were around 1 to 2x, to almost 6 times. And Q2 of 2026 is 8 times contributions by person, or I imagine they mean agent as well in this
Yeah.
particular case. And so that level of growth really requires a rethinking of the developer infrastructure. And the symptoms we're hearing are first felt on the code side. And so you can hear companies complain about pull requests. So the volume of pull request reviews has increased significantly. We have some of our customers that are reporting, 3 to 10 times more. But pull request is now the bottleneck, which is throttling the build problem. And so the first issue that we've seen, and GitHub famously created a lot of interesting charts about the growth of code and GitHub and pressures that it put on GitHub. So source is
Yeah.
the front of it. Source is under pressure. The next one is review. So code reviews are the challenges and are becoming a little bit of this like throttling mechanism for the real problem that is starting to surface, which is build and test infrastructure. And as soon as we addressed issues with codes, issues with reviews, we will start seeing the challenges that basically we've been working for more than a decade on with builds. And so this is the moment. This is the moment. So Bazel has been adopted in its nascency 15 years ago, 10 years ago by companies like SpaceX and Uber and Robinhood. And it was mostly because even in its beta state, it was the best built platform for scale. But now we're seeing Bazel is having its moment really as the only solution for this level of scale. And I'm happy to talk more about just the Bazel adoption and what we've seen here as well.
You know, I'd love to hear about that. I mean, I think that we are always, yeah, as I say, the history of the project, we we've seen this in other areas. When we were thinking about container orchestration, um, an organization that had been doing that at scale and built something that was going to benefit the industry, in this case, Kubernetes, was Google. Certainly, Google meets scale challenges uh, well before a lot of the rest of us. Um, but yeah, no, I'd love to, drill in a little bit then into what you're currently seeing. As you say, there were some early adopters there, but I think also the balance between, you've got an open source project. So let's talk a bit about the actual scale challenges, and then a little bit about why EngFlow is the right organization to be standing this up.
Of course. So as far as the challenges, obviously scale is the pressing one, but there's also other benefits of using Bazel. It's hermeticity and security, and its ability to know that all of your inputs were accounted for and you using the exactly tested versions in creating a shippable artifact. And so Bazel is now being adopted primarily for scale, but also for its extensibility and ability to help organizations standardize on the common developer infrastructure. And so in 2000 in 2017, when I actually created the first BazelCon while still working at Google together with my colleagues, and we saw 200 people packed into the room in Sunnyvale, and those were the early adopters of Bazel. So 200 engineers, maybe one or two per company, but behind each of them, there are thousands of engineers using build pipelines that these folks were creating. And this was the first kind of community mindshare kind of coming together and to deciding that this is now the time to create more tooling, to create more community governance, and start exchanging ideas around making Bazel scale. And as the community grew, so I've been involved ever since in open source community, creating the conference, giving talks
And by
multiple
the
times.
way, I mean, I guess a lot of our listeners will know about this, but that's a very magic moment, that first conference, for a project or product where, yeah, I mean, having been involved in a few of those, and certainly there's something, it's just around that Dunbar scale. It's the first time the village gets together, and you've probably been working together sort of offline, um, and coming together. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful moment. So that must have felt great.
Yeah, it was actually interesting to see that at the time Google did zero marketing for Bazel. So Google really built it for itself and open sourced it only because other companies started creating similar solutions, like Meta that's created Buck,
Yep.
and Twitter at the time created its own pants system. And so this was a wake up call for Google that the standards are going to start like really having a challenge if Google does not open source the build system. So while we've created that conference to bring together the mindshare, we actually had lots of collaboration with engineers at Meta and at Twitter at the time, and converging on the language that is used for Bazel definition, which is Starlark. And later build systems also started adopting that language. It is also something that Buck 2 is using from Meta as well. And really, this was a place to bring together folks working on the scale challenges at various companies and discuss how to make Bazel extensible and adaptable. And so that was the moment where rules ecosystem became more prevalent. And so Bazel in itself is a powerful tool, but what makes it more valuable is that it has extensive rules ecosystem where developers can have the same build platform for JavaScript or Java or C++, where traditional tools, you need to have different build platforms building these components. So one of Bazel's unique elements was that, and a lot of the talks in the early Bazel cons were all about rules, creating migrations, using rules to have more effective migrations, using Gazelle, which is the open source tool that's created by one of our EngFlow engineers while still at Google at the time. And so community saw the value, and community saw the need for strong investment. At the time, that investment came a lot from Google. And over the years, the balance was shifting with companies like EngFlow being created, with Linux Foundation that we've just established to create governance around Bazel community tooling and ecosystem. We are now seeing the move and maturity of this ecosystem. And that to me is also a good signal why more companies now than ever before are adopting Bazel right from the start, because the community matured, but also more importantly, things that were rough edges of Bazel, AI is smoothing those over. So for example, one of Bazel's rough edges is its learning curve and documentation. And my team actually is also investing in this and making Bazel documentation better, collaborating with engineers from Astranis and several other companies, making it better. But really, I think we're now making documentation better for agents to read. And we're
100%.
seeing more and more developers are interacting with their agents to learn how to use Bazel, to do Bazel migration itself, which is also one of the rough edges. And then perhaps the most phenomenal one is Bazel never had like really strong IDE integration.
Mhm.
And so now we are living in a world where IDEs are, at least the visual ones, are less of a dominant code creation engine.
100%. So the sort of the Claude code, I mean, Claude code is pretty good at handling those kinds of integrations.
Absolutely. What we've seen from our customers is that before they would put error messages from Bazel into Stack Overflow or just ask on Bazel Slack, and
Right.
overwhelmingly now Claude is pretty good at answering those questions.
Yeah.
And I hear good feedback from developers using Codex and other platforms as well.
Yeah. Well, that's uh, it's a great story. A thing with a few, a few, as you say, rough edges, can get smoothed out in this era of AI tooling. Um, and to your argument about Basil's time is now, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just interesting because so much of the developer experience that we've said is so important is now agent experience. Um, so let me ask you a quick question about that. I mean, what are some of the things that you're doing to make sure the docs are agent ready? I mean, there's the obvious, publishing in Markdown and so on, but what are some of the specifics that are about making? I mean, well, it's a very different definition of accessibility, but agent accessibility. What are you doing in that regard?
Yeah, let me in that point also reveal another cool feature of Bazel and use that as an example. So Bazel has tremendous amount of data that it outputs, which is really hard for humans to process. It's got build event stream. It's got Bazel query. It's got profile information, Bazel profile itself, the tracing information, and
Hmm.
all of that data. Today, we are processing through, or at least for the past 6 years, we've been processing by building relational stores, by creating observability as part of our platform. But more and more, I'm now starting to see agents are using that information much better, but burning a lot of tokens on the way. And so what we implemented at EngFlow more recently with this customer insight that we've gotten is MCP and skills that are using deterministic information from
Yeah.
profiles to help agents come to the conclusions faster and complement and default to this discovery when deterministic approach is not working.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
we're certainly
making
not
agent
living.
ready, that's the big part, like using what you can about your data and deterministic way to answer it.
Yeah, super important. I mean, look, it's July of 2026. You're not going to be talking to any organization that isn't concerned about how many tokens they're burning. So yeah, that's super important. So we we've got some of the this sort of the journey from Google, to more general purpose. Um, Maybe let's cut over a bit to yeah, to these questions of customers and scale. And yeah, what let's it's always engineers love stories, numbers about high scale and so on. So yeah, have you got any examples about current state of the art, what you're seeing in your customer base?
Indeed, indeed. We actually did that analysis recently for our internal team summit, just to understand what is the scale that we are processing today across all of our customers and how that changed in just 1 year. And remarkably, what we saw was that in May of 2025, across all of our customer clusters, all of the companies combined that we're managing were executing 250 million build actions per week. And so this is your build and test workflows. So look, it's a good metric for your developer velocity, but also for the complexity and scale you're working with. And just within a year, by May of this year, we're seeing close to 2 billion actions executed by the same kind of set of customers per week. And that to absorb that level of scale, like EngFlow had to do a lot of work over the past year. And the reason we did this internal study is because it didn't feel like we were absorbing that scale on a day-to-day basis. From
Mhm.
time to time, we have a customer request to look at some tuning, cost tuning, or some performance tuning. And so we've been investing in this along the way. But when we look at the results, we're seeing that our customer Plaid more recently actually commented on that they've absorbed 3 times the number of pull requests without any change in their cloud or EngFlow license infrastructure. And so that's a way that we can help companies scale sublinearly, scale their costs, and have a better efficiency in the overall cycle. And this is where, like, I'm going to bring it back to, like, again, why Bazel is having its moment. And we do have customers that are not using Bazel, but Bazel is uniquely positioned here, is
By
because
the way, well, I just want to hear a little bit about that. When you say customers that aren't using Bazel, because like there is a world out there that is not all Bazel.
indeed,
There are customers that have alternatives. Migration can be hard. What do you mean some of your customers aren't using Bazel? I thought you were the Bazel company.
that's right. It's interesting. I let the cat out of the bag. So we are a Bazel company, but we actually our own thinking as the team that built Bazel at Google, and like we are at this point the largest concentration of Bazel experts anywhere in the world here at EngFlow. We actually weren't bullish that Bazel will win the market in 2021 when we started implementing some of these systems, and we looked at the approach of, well, developers will always want to have choices. So can we bring some of Bazel's best features into the older generation build systems or into other build systems that may be compatible with Bazel level of thinking. And so actually, Bazel has a ton of advantages, but the magic is not only Bazel, it's remote execution API.
Yeah.
And any build system that implements that remote execution API means that they are able to parallelize their workload on large number of smaller machines as opposed to smaller number of large machines, which is where a lot of the performance and cost savings come from. And so we basically implemented a remote execution service that works with any built system that implements remote execution API. So Meta's Buck 2 is implementing that, and Android platform is implementing that, AOSP. And so we increased the number of customers that are using Bazel that are using remote execution within that stream. We also acquired a company, TP Build, a year ago, and they have been working on making C++ CMake build system more compatible with the modern concepts. And so we connected that through remote execution API. And so we're able also to get them the benefits of parallel execution. But with all of this, while remote execution API and parallelism is really, really essential for speed and performance, Bazel has other advantages. And this is why we're seeing companies benefiting from having more tooling that is built on Bazel that may not exist for other build systems. And that tooling is what's enabling companies to scale. It's the security that I mentioned, being able to create a software bill of material as part of the build process, which is becoming much more relevant. And it's analyzing vast amount of data from Bazel to
Mhm.
improve the underlying performance of their build processes. And so we call this build graph analysis. Bazel uniquely provides visibility into this that allows companies to parallelize further and perhaps not continue to scale through adding more hardware at the problem.
Is this something that organizations can like run themselves? I mean, it's an open source project. I mean, you're making it. It sounds very cloud-like, but I mean, obviously, there must be organizations that are um, that have reasons that they want to be running their own infrastructure.
Indeed, and what I've been also saying recently to my team is that I'm seeing signals that AI future is multi-cloud, and by multi-cloud it means run everywhere where you can get good amount of resources.
Mhm.
So Bazel itself is an open source project that you can install on any infrastructure, be it on-prem, your personal machine, or cloud. EngFlow provides the platform that distributes Bazel builds and parallelizes them with observability in a most efficient, cost-efficient, and performant way. In the cloud, we support multiple cloud environments such as AWS, GCP, and also building out the Kubernetes-based solution that allows you to run it anywhere, on-prem or on any other flavor of Kubernetes, like Azure Kubernetes. I'm seeing also is on the rise right now. And then we're hearing neo clouds like Nebius and CoreWeave.
Yeah.
Oracle Cloud has reached my radar as well recently. So it's actually quite remarkable that from Bazel's perspective, it doesn't really care where it runs, but being able to parallelize it effectively, you need to know a little bit more about the auto scaling of a particular cloud, the storage system of a particular cloud on-prem infrastructure. And that's where we focused the past 2 years at EngFlow specifically. And we built more efficient autoscalers than GCP and AWS native ones. So Snowflake is one of our customers that actually ran it themselves, that ran Bazel and remote execution open source project on their own AWS infrastructure. And by simply switching to EngFlow, they cut their cloud costs in half because we are that much more efficient in utilizing the cloud infrastructure for the same performance benefit.
So Snowflake made the transition from running it itself to running it on EngFlow.
Yes, yes. And
Uh,
the
so one of your
case that is coming
one
up.
of your salespeople definitely made their quota that quarter.
This was one of those deals where I got a call from Snowflake CFO, just trying to understand how they're making money on the software that we are selling them. So this was a really interesting opportunity for us. And since then, we've seen more and more companies. And so you asked me to share some numbers. Last November at BazelCon, I actually gave a talk together with a staff engineer at Databricks,
Okay.
also our customer, and they revealed the numbers. So Databricks is at 3,000 developers. Their code base grew to 100 million lines of code in their mono repo. I expect that it's close to double now at least. They have seen twice as much code growth in a year, and they were like executing 1 billion actions a day, and so that is a really huge scale. And now when we're talking to customers at this scale, when they're anticipating more and more load, mostly agent-based load, we are asking them questions. Uh, have you looked at your dependencies? Did you look at the build graph? I actually published a blog post a few months ago about my week in a field, just like being on calls with customers and meeting customers at various industry events and dinners, and hearing these signals. And the signals are overwhelming that uh, CI is under pressure. The company is trying to figure out how to parallelize their builds, or they're already using the latest tooling like remote execution,
Yep.
and now they're investing in their build graph optimizations, which is what we can surface with our analytics for companies to scale smarter. And so the goal for me creating that blog post was how can we help companies scale smartly? Because even if you can throw that much hardware at a problem, we've also seen our customers that are running 200,000 core clusters getting cloud provider stockout issues. So there simply isn't enough
Capacity.
compute available at the time that they need. Which is
100%.
back to the point as well that I
By the
made.
way, we'll put a link to this blog post in the description. But yeah, no, we are seeing these patterns, and also, I mean, quite a nice position to be in to say, hey, um, we're running builds for the two, arguably the key players in data infrastructure of the current era.
Yeah, I would say that they're clearly leaders in seeing the volume from AI and investing in build developer infrastructure early. And obviously, like Databricks and Snowflake are those leaders. MongoDB, another customer, also has kind of invested
Those
in
are the bongo as well. You're
infrastructure.
really racking up all the data
We
infrastructure companies.
essentially, right, we own the large scale data space, but more importantly, at this point there is no company that can handle the scale that we're running at, which is like 200,000 core infrastructure, like 2 billion actions per week. And so we started by having these companies as early adopters because they are seeing signals before everybody else.
Mhm.
The early majority is coming. And like one of the examples I wanted to actually also highlight, Tinder published a really, really great blog about how their investment in Bazel and in parallelization and hermetic tools positioned them so well that now with Cursor and Bazel, they're able to do their software upgrades much, much faster than ever before. And so we've seen companies learn from each other. They read the blogs. They learn how, like what their peers are using, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why we run BazelCon is bring all these peers together to talk about latest tooling that they can take advantage of. And
Let me
and
ask you a
and this
question.
is an example of
Oh, sorry.
fundamental kind of AI infrastructure investment. So
Mhm.
Tinder made that investment early, fairly early. So did Databricks. So did Zoox, another company that we work very closely with. And Zoox has migrated from their DIY solution to EngFlow, and again, like with cost savings, but really extensibility and supportability of the new level of scale that they need to be working with.
Let me ask you a question. So I mean, look, if I cut you, Helen, you'd bleed Basil. I mean, pretty clearly. This is the
All
you're
green.
right. Absolutely, you are absolutely. Um, but you're sort of the way you described it, and if we go back to that 2021 moment where you're like, what if Basil doesn't win? And sort of, I'm quite interested in. I mean, that's a really interesting position, but also this question about you don't want to just be the Basil company. You want to be the build management at AI scale company, right?
We absolutely are at this point. And so we're running that level of scale for major stock exchange with CMake, for major gaming company with Buck2, for most of the browsers out there with Chromium build system. Like we are definitely the company that owns build management at scale. And interestingly enough, Bazel is having its moment for the first time, like since it was open sourced in like much higher number of people, not just adopting Bazel, but also a sign of like job recs. You can see every single company at this point that has large code bases is looking for people with Bazel expertise. So we see in the future is convergent towards using Bazel for its core features. We also seen these other build systems that I mentioned being essential for the audiences that they serve. So like Chromium is very much
Yep.
in Chromium build space. And gaming is certainly adopting Buck2, and definitely Meta is having its moment with Buck2 because of scale as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the bet on parallelization is generally a good bet.
Indeed.
And let me ask you that question about GitHub then. Um, you know, uh, I think that when I look around, there are people sort of looking at actions, trying to work out um, what their strategy should be. I mean, how do you embrace the GitHub customer?
Well, GitHub customers, first of all, like they come with a number of other tools that they use, and so as I mentioned, code is step one, review is step two. Then there's build and CI, and so we see in this as a challenge. Most of our customers are pushing GitHub to its limits, and at this point, a lot really the solution is parallelization of the build workflows, parallelization of the test workflows. So we natively integrate with GitHub Actions, for example, making them more scalable and more parallelizable through the use of our CI runner infrastructure. This is a fairly busy space as well. There's lots of
Mhm.
companies now trying to uh, plug the gaps that GitHub has created until GitHub itself fixes them.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I would say it's really the build metadata that we are the experts in. So to be the leader in build management at scale for us, it's a combination of our team's expertise and the data that we accumulated in our platform to make smart decisions around how to restructure dependencies, how to squeeze more from compute, how to parallelize data. And so to us, for any company that's starting with their kind of GitHub infrastructure, looking at builds and looking at their CI, the next logical step for us is to work through the GitHub Actions kind of self-hosted runners that we're able to provide or managed, and ultimately. We've actually even seen the benefit of having this kind of forward deployed engineer impact, where we started helping our customers to move more workload from GitHub Actions to core remote execution. And by doing that, they're saving a ton on compute, but they're also getting much faster performance improvements. And so we'll be publishing the blog that we've done with companies like Apex and Iterable, and they're a combination of CI runner system plus remote execution, and really understanding what can be parallelized in the code base and using agents to parallelize those things more effectively gets the company's ultimate kind of performance and speed and scale, and makes them really ready to absorb the scale that's coming at them. And the example that I brought up in the beginning with Plaid absorbing 3 times more without any changes to their cost is really because there's so much parallelism in their system, and we work together to implement more parallelism as we go.
Yeah.
And
And
I would also say another kind of data point to give you, back to the Anthropic example that I'm giving. It's not surprised that AI companies are predominantly convergent in Bazel, and so OpenAI is investing heavily. There's a lot of open source efforts with Codex, driven by some of the prominent community leaders like Zbarsky and several others that are openly in the community or showing the impact of running this on Bazel. We're seeing that traditional build systems are not scaling, and we knew that there's like about 1 million lines of code in your mono repo when you really need to start looking at different solution for build management at scale. And
mhm.
so every company is getting closer to that metric than before. But also we're seeing that AI companies, even AI companies, I would say they started not with Bazel, and they're converging on Bazel, and they're migrating now that they have doubled or tripled their code base within short amount of time. And so what I wanted to leave the folks with who are watching this is, how do you know that you need to take a different look at the build infrastructure, at the build management at scale? It's first of all, you're using variety of build systems for different languages. Like that's a sign that you have complexity in your system. The other one is that for built for languages that do not require a build system, interpreted languages like Python or JavaScript, you're not using build system, but you're generating so many tests that you're not sure how those tests will be operated together and how to parallelize them. And what we're seeing at that happens at that point is that companies are starting to uh, turn their CI system into these manual shards so that they can create parallelism by doing these shards of tests instead of letting the build system like Bazel take care of all of that for you.
There you go. Because I mean, I have to say, sort of summing up, the thing that has really surprised me uh, recently, and you spoke about, um, development, sort of verification, deployment, where build sits in that. The thing that I have been really surprised by is the rapidity with which organizations, even in regulated industries, are saying things like, we're not going to do manual code review anymore, at least not for everything we're building. Um, and that is definitely, even a year ago, I would have, I would not have expected, I wouldn't have expected to go in and be talking to, yeah, a bank in the UK. In the last few weeks, manufacturing company, bank in the UK, gaming company, where they're like, actually, um, and one of these organizations in particular, and I don't think I should name them, uh, they've started saying, well, we don't call them, it's not about the branches, it's about the leaves. Branches, we will do some human verification. But for a lot of what we do, they're just leads. And I think that if you think about the camel versus pets that we talked about with infrastructure, we're seeing applications and they're just much more disposable now. And that of course accelerates how much software is being built. Because if you've got a good process where you can do a rollback if there is a problem, then you've got a much higher tolerance for risk. And yeah, as I say, when we had this conversation with a bank, it was really surprising.
I heard the same conversation 2 weeks ago when I talked with some of our ride sharing and autonomous driving customers that they're looking at risk based pull request reviews. Uh,
Yes.
so figuring out like what goes automatically and what's not. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, pull requests are the current lever, like that once you pull it, the throttling on your build infrastructure will not be in place, and companies that have not invested in build management at scale will suddenly start facing exactly the same issues that GitHub is facing when code bases blew up. And
Yep.
so this currently is a really cool moment to observe in our industry, is that pull requests are still throttling how many builds are happening. And yet most of our customers have seen from 2 to 4 times increase in their build, in the number of builds that are happening on a weekly basis. And so, but once that lever is pulled, because you're now doing a lot more automatic reviews,
Yes.
the build infrastructure will show its cracks, and the test for are you going to have cracks or not is predominantly, are you using Bazel, and are you using remote execution and caching system that Bazel is natively providing, and with all of the acceleration that we can offer on top of it.
Okay. Well, I think you've been even more bullish about Basil than I had expected. Um, but I did, I was pleased when I had this conversation. What's important, as I say, as we sum up, is this, yeah, like, and it's again, every day in the AI era, sort of reassess your priors day, and it again, like 1 year ago, I was like, well, actually, the agent pull request that makes sense, right? You have a human, get the agent to do some work, makes a pull request, look at the code, ship the code. That's just nothing, nothing like how we're actually using agents. That's just completely, that's broken down. And I think that fundamental primitive, in terms of workflows that has propelled the industry for, the last, well, 12, 15 years or so, um, yeah, fundamentally breaking down. So yeah, new laws of physics, basically.
Yeah, essentially what's changed really isn't Bazel, it's everyone else. And the pressures that once defined a few large code bases, like the one at Meta,
Yeah.
Google, Twitter, are now showing up everywhere. And languages, like there's more languages in a code base. And all of this is putting CI pipelines under pressure. And I'm actually like looking at this on a weekly basis with our customers. And the more investment that they're able to make in understanding their own code bases and restructuring and using agent workflows to restructure their own dependencies, the better they will be ready for continued increase that is happening. It's not even an increase in the code growth, it's increase in velocity, is that there's more changes, and more
Yeah.
changes means that more changes need to be reviewed and built. And I do hope
100%.
that with AI, code bases are growing, but hopefully there's AI is also good at deleting code as much as it is creating code as well.
Well, we're going to have to see a lot of that because, as I say, so much of it is fungible. Um, yeah, we're going to need to throw away an awful lot of code. Um, Otherwise, things are going to get very, very expensive. And on that happy note, yeah, that's been amazing, Helen. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the show. Like I say, I really enjoy a good sort of lesson from history. We recently had Staren Janini on from um, Google's Cloud Run team, learned a bit about the foundations of that product. I always think it's interesting. Yeah, of course, things are interesting that happened today and over the last 18 months.
And
But,
of course, the fun fact is that Stern was my colleague working on the Bazel project in 2017. So
there you go. So this is where,
goes all full circle.
come to the Red Monk podcast if you want to hear these interesting stories about Google technology. Yeah, Stern and Helen working on that project. So yeah, what I would say, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed the show. The classic things, please do share it if you think anyone's hitting some build limits and they might need some help. But yeah, share it, like it, subscribe, do all of those good things. But yeah, really, Helen, thanks so much for joining us.
Sounds great. And join us on the Bazel World Tour, where we do bring together people that care about it. And we're publishing our events at meetup.build for that as well.
Okay, so there you go, everyone. That's your call to action. Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks all for joining us.
Thank you.